Hermetics. Franz Bardon, the Magician. Lesson 6. The Akashic or Ether Principle. Deep reading about Akasha. We have arrived at the source. 5 chapters have moved through the created order: fire, water, air, earth, light. Each one was a differentiation, something that emerged from something else, something that has properties, boundaries, polarity, a positive and negative face. Each one was something we could describe. Akasha cannot be described. Bardon knows this and says it directly. But he writes about it anyway, because the student needs a map of the territory, even if the territory itself is beyond maps. The chapter on Akasha is Bardon drawing a circle around the edge of what language can do, and then writing inside the circle. Here is where language stops and reality continues. This is the most important chapter in the theoretical section of the Adept. Everything before it was the workshop of creation. This chapter is the workshop's origin. 1. The sphere of causes, the single most clarifying phrase. Bardon gives Akasha many names in this short chapter: highest, most powerful, primordial being, primordial ground, uncreated, incomprehensible, indefinable. Each name points at something true. But the one phrase that most precisely locates Akasha within his system is this. It is, in a word, the sphere of causes. To understand this phrase completely is to understand the entire Hermetic system in a single statement. Everything in the created world, every element, every fluid, every plane, every entity, every event, is an effect. Fire is the effect of Akasha's first outward differentiation. Water is the effect of fire requiring an opposite pole. Air is the effect of fire and water requiring mediation. Earth is the effect of all three requiring solidification. Light is the effect of fire at its most refined. Your thoughts are effects. Your body is an effect. This planet is an effect. The entire manifest universe, from the densest rock to the most rarefied mental plane, is the accumulated effect of causes that trace back to one point, Akasha. And the consequences of being the sphere of causes are radical. Akasha is prior to all the elements, not just historically but ontologically. The elements do not exist independently and then enter Akasha. They arise from it continuously as a flame arises from fuel. Remove the Akashic cause and the elemental effect dissolves. Akasha is simultaneous with all effects. It does not produce the universe and then step back. It is the ongoing ground of everything. The table in front of you is being caused right now at this moment by the Akashic principle. The moment that ground withdrew, the table would cease. Akasha is the access point for permanent change. If you want to alter an effect, you can work at the level of effects, and this is slow, difficult, and temporary. If you can place a cause in the Akashic sphere, the effect at every lower level is compelled to follow. This is the deepest secret of magical practice, and Bardon states it explicitly: a conscious cause, such as a wish, a thought, an idea evoked in this sphere with a corresponding dynamic concentration of will, firm faith, and fullest conviction, must be realized through the elements, regardless of the level or sphere at which the realization is required. This is one of the greatest magical secrets in the entire book, placed without ceremony in a single sentence. The Akashic sphere is not a place you visit for spiritual experience. It is the lever of creation. Archimedes said, "Give me a lever long enough and a place to stand, and I will move the world." Akasha is that place to stand. 2. Space and timeless, what it means to be outside the dimensional framework. Bardon states that Akasha is space and timeless, which must be read carefully because it does not mean small or brief. It means Akasha is the principle prior to the creation of space and time, and therefore not subject to either. Recall from the Earth chapter, space, measures, weight, and time arose as consequences of solidification. They are properties of the Earth principle. They did not pre-exist Earth. Earth created them by setting limits on the action of the other 3 elements. Akasha preceded Earth. Therefore, Akasha preceded space and time. Therefore, Akasha has no location. It is not somewhere rather than somewhere else. And it has no duration. It does not exist for a period and then stop. It is the ground from which the very concepts of location and duration emerged. This has an immediately verifiable consequence in practice. When the student performs the Akasha pore-breathing exercise, imagining themselves as the center of unlimited space, filled with the finest ultraviolet substance of the universal ether, connected to the unlimited space in all directions simultaneously, they are not imagining spacelessness. They are temporarily removing the earth principle filter that normally contracts their awareness into a located, bounded, temporally sequential experience. The spacelessness is real. The imagination exercise is simply clearing the lens. Bardon also notes that the astral plane, accessed through the magic mirror, is a degree of density of the Akashic principle and is therefore timeless and spaceless. The initiate who finds their way there can find everything here, whether it is past, present, or future. This is not a mystical fantasy. If the astral plane is an expression of Akasha, and Akasha is outside time, then all moments are simultaneously accessible from the astral plane. Past, present, and future are distinctions that only appear within the temporal framework that Earth created. From outside that framework, they are all equally present. 3. The uncreated, the logical terminus of every causal chain. Every philosophical tradition that thinks carefully enough eventually hits the same wall. If everything that exists was caused by something, what caused the first thing? The question of the uncaused cause is the oldest problem in metaphysics. Bardon answers it directly and without apology. It is the uncreated, the incomprehensible, the indefinable. Akasha was not produced by anything. It did not emerge from a prior cause. It has no precondition, no antecedent, no substrate. It simply is, and from that is, everything else becomes. This is not evasion. It is the correct logical terminus of any causal chain. If you trace any chain of causes backward far enough, you arrive at a point where the question, but what caused that, no longer applies, because you have arrived at something that is outside the cause and effect framework entirely. Akasha is that point. It is not the first cause in the sense of the first in a series. It is the ground of causality itself, the principle that makes cause and effect possible at all. The uncreated quality of Akasha also means something precise about its relationship to karma. Karma, the law of cause and effect, has its aspect in the Akashic principle. Bardon addresses this in the very next chapter. But Akasha is not subject to karma. Karma is the law that governs the elemental realm. Akasha is the ground from which that law operates. The sphere of causes is not itself caused. The law of cause and effect does not cause itself. The practical consequence, the magician who achieves genuine Akashic consciousness, even temporarily, stands for that moment outside the karmic framework. Not above it in moral terms, but prior to it in structural terms. This is what Bardon means when he says that a cause placed in the Akashic sphere must be realized through the elements. The magician has stepped behind the law and spoken from the ground of the law itself. The cause is already in the sphere of causes. The effect is no longer optional. 4. The religions refer to it as God, the most careful statement in the chapter. Bardon writes, the religions refer to it as God. Not, Akasha is God. Not, God is Akasha. The religions refer to it as God. The phrasing is exact and deliberate. Bardon is doing something extremely precise here. He is acknowledging that every major religious tradition has pointed at Akasha. They have all, in their different languages and frameworks, been gesturing toward the uncreated ground of all things. And he is simultaneously noting that the word God is a referral, a pointing gesture, not a description. No description is possible. He has already said, incomprehensible, indefinable. If it is indefinable, then calling it God does not define it, it merely points at it with a culturally familiar name. Tradition. Name for Akasha. What the name emphasizes. Hermetics Bardon. Akasha/ether/ether principle. The causal ground, the sphere of all causes. Hinduism/yoga. Akasha, Sanskrit, space. The subtlest of the 5 tattvas, container of all sound and vibration. Kabbalah. Ein Sof, the endless. The limitless ground prior to even the first Sephira. Taoism. The Tao, Wu Qi. The undifferentiated ground before yin-yang arise. Physics. The quantum field, zero-point field. The underlying field from which all particles emerge as excitations. Buddhism. Sunyata, emptiness, dharmakaya. Not absence, but the pregnant potentiality from which all form arises. Alchemy. The quintessence, prima materia. The 5th essence underlying and permeating the 4 material elements. Christianity. God/the Holy Spirit, the Logos. The uncreated ground that created and sustains all things. Chinese Naidan. Wuji, without ultimate. The state prior to polarity, from which Taiji, the polarity, emerges. Every entry in this table is pointing at the same thing. The differences between them are differences of cultural context, pedagogical approach, and emphasis, not differences of the thing being named. Bardon is the rare teacher who knows this and says so directly, without privileging his own tradition's vocabulary over others. The Hermeticist who dismisses the Taoist Wu Qi as inferior, or the Buddhist who dismisses the Akasha as materialist, or the Christian who dismisses the Hindu formulation as pagan, all are confusing the name for the named. The practical implication is liberating. The student who has genuinely understood Akasha can read any of these traditions and extract what is being pointed at, regardless of the cultural container. Akasha is the universal solvent of religious difference. When everyone is pointing at the same thing, the argument about who has the better finger is revealed as a distraction. 5. The origin and purity of all thoughts and ideas, Akasha as the mind of God. Bardon makes a specific and extraordinary claim. Akasha is the origin and purity of all thoughts and ideas. Not just the origin of matter. Not just the origin of energy. The origin of thoughts. The origin of ideas. This places cognition itself inside the Akashic framework. Ideas are not generated by brains and then imposed on a material world. Ideas arise from Akasha and descend through the planes into material expression, passing through the mental matrix, through the astral body, through the etheric body, finally crystallizing into physical form. The brain is not the source of thought. It is the last terminal in a transmission that began at the causal level. The word purity here is doing specific work. Bardon is saying that ideas in their Akashic form are pristine, prior to distortion, prior to elemental coloring, prior to the interference of personal psychology, prior to the limitations of language. When an idea descends from Akasha through the mental plane, it acquires the color of the mental body's elemental composition. Through the astral plane, it acquires emotional charge. By the time it reaches language and the physical world, it has been transformed by every layer it passed through. What you think is a translation of something much purer. This is why genuine inspiration feels qualitatively different from ordinary thinking. The experience of a truly inspired idea, mathematical, artistic, philosophical, or scientific, is described by its recipients with remarkable consistency across cultures and eras. It arrived whole. It felt given rather than constructed. It had a luminosity or clarity that ordinary thought lacks. These are descriptions of an Akashic idea making contact with the receiving mind, the purity of the origin briefly perceptible before it fully descends into the translator's elemental composition. Mozart described hearing his compositions complete before writing them down. Ramanujan attributed his mathematical theorems to the goddess Namagiri, who showed them to him in dreams. Kekulé saw the benzene ring structure in a hypnagogic vision. Tesla visualized his alternating current motor in its complete operational form before building it. These are not metaphors. These are initiates, knowingly or unknowingly, reporting Akashic reception. 6. The quintessence of the alchemists, the fifth element that contains all four. The alchemists use the term quintessence, literally the fifth essence, for the mysterious substance that underlies and permeates the four material elements. They sought it in their laboratories, in their furnaces, in their distillations and sublimations. The prima materia, the primordial matter from which all things arise and to which all things return, was their greatest quest. Bardon identifies it directly. It is the quintessence of the alchemists. Not alike the quintessence. Not analogous to it. It is it. The alchemists were working toward Akasha from the material direction, approaching the causal principle through its material effects. Some reached it. Many did not, because they looked for it in physical substances instead of recognizing it as the ground that precedes and produces all physical substances. The Akashic pore-breathing exercise is the Hermetic student's version of the alchemical great work. The direct attempt to make conscious contact with the prima materia, not by distilling it in a crucible, but by recognizing it as the very substance of awareness itself. The ultraviolet, almost black-violet coloring Bardon assigns to the etheric substance in the imagination exercise is not arbitrary. It is the color of the liminal, the edge of the visible spectrum, the border between what can be perceived and what lies beyond perception. Akasha is always at that edge. It cannot be seen directly. Only its effects can be seen. But it can be felt as the ground from which seeing itself arises. 7. It cannot be dammed up, the one limitation that reveals everything. In the practical instructions for the Akasha pore-breathing exercise, Bardon makes a statement that initially sounds like a technical note, but is actually a profound philosophical disclosure. I must remark that Akasha cannot be dammed up in the same way as the life force. Every other substance Bardon works with can be accumulated: the vital force, the elements, the electric fluid, the magnetic fluid. You breathe them in, you hold them, you direct them, you release them. They respond to the same logic as physical substances. More in means more present, more concentrated means more powerful. Akasha does not work this way. You cannot accumulate more of it because it is already everywhere at maximum density. It is not a substance that comes and goes. It is the ground from which all substances emerge. You cannot add Akasha to a situation any more than you can add space to a room that is already in space. The room already is in space. The situation already is in Akasha. What the pore-breathing exercise does, then, is not bring more Akasha into the body. It removes the elemental interference that prevents the student from being aware of the Akasha that is already there. The exercise is not filling, it is clearing. Not addition, subtraction of the obscuration. This is the most important technical distinction in the entire practical curriculum, and it maps precisely onto the deepest teaching of every genuine contemplative tradition. You are not trying to acquire something you lack. You are trying to recognize what has always been present. The Buddhist teaching of Buddha nature, the Hindu Atman Brahman identity, the Christian mystics indwelling God, the Taoist original nature, all are pointing at this same structural fact. The obstacle is not absence of Akasha. The obstacle is the accumulation of elemental noise that prevents recognition of what is already there. 8. Akasha in the human being, conscience as the subtlest form of divine providence. Bardon locates Akasha in the human being with extraordinary precision. It is not only in one part, it is in all parts at different densities. Level in the human being. Akasha expresses as spirit, mental body, conscience, the subtlest form of divine providence operating within, soul, astral body, The astral matrix, the electromagnetic binding agent between body and soul. Body, physical. Blood and seed, the vitality arising from their mutual interaction. Breath, the akashic impregnation of inhaled air, the carrier of conscious intention across all levels. Consciousness, the background awareness prior to any specific thought, feeling, or sensation. Sushumna spine, the central channel along which all elemental centers, chakras, communicate and are regulated. The entry for conscience deserves particular attention. Bardon describes conscience in the KTU as the subtlest form of divine providence, the akashic principle expressing itself as the inner moral knowing of the spirit. This is not guilt, which is an astral emotion, or social shame, which is an earth-plane conditioned response. Conscience in Bardon's sense is the direct perception, by the immortal spirit, of alignment or misalignment with the akashic order. When something feels deeply, quietly wrong, not the shrill voice of social conditioning, not the loud discomfort of blocked desire, but a still, unambiguous interior knowing that this is not right, that is Akasha speaking through the spirit. It is the causal principle registering at the level of the immortal self, a deviation from the laws that govern it. The magician who has developed sufficient inner stillness to distinguish genuine conscience from elemental noise, emotion, conditioning, ego, has developed a direct akashic compass. The Sushumna, the central channel running from the crown center, Sahasrara, along the spine to the root center, is the akashic pathway within the body. It connects all elemental centers and regulates their communication. The spine is the physical anchor of the akashic principle in the human being, which is why every tradition that works with inner energy eventually focuses on the spine, the central channel, the axis of the body as the site of the highest work. 9. It is all in all the final phrase that refuses to be elaborated. Bardon ends the chapter with 4 words, it's all in all. After all the names, all the descriptions, all the philosophical framings, the highest, the most powerful, the primordial ground, the sphere of causes, the uncreated, the incomprehensible, the quintessence, timeless, spaceless. He ends with the most simple statement possible. Not because he has run out of things to say. Because he has reached the point where more words would take you further from the thing, not closer to it. All in all is the collapse of subject and object into one statement. Akasha is not in everything the way water is in a sponge. Akasha is not beneath everything the way a foundation is beneath a building. Akasha is not surrounding everything the way space surrounds objects. Akasha is everything, in everything as everything, the ground, the fabric, the substance, the law, and the origin of the entirety of existence simultaneously. Every mystic from every tradition who pushed far enough eventually reported the same. There is a point at which the sense of encountering something other dissolves, and what remains is only the direct recognition that there is only this, unlimited, uncaused, self-luminous, and utterly ordinary at the same time. Bardon gives that recognition 4 words. He could have used 400 pages. The 4 words are more accurate. The core synthesis, the architecture of the entire system. Looking backward from here, the entire theoretical structure of the adept reveals itself as a single movement. Akasha, the uncreated ground, the sphere of causes, all in all. Fire, the first differentiation of Akasha outward, the universe's first act. Water, fire's necessary opposite, the universe's first memory. Air, fire and water's mediator, the universe's first understanding. Earth, the solidification of all 3, the universe's first permanent form. Light, fire and water made visible, the universe's first self-revelation. Akasha again, present throughout, as the ground of every level, the cause of every cause, the origin that never left. The sequence is not linear. It is a circle. Akasha produces the elements. The elements, fully realized in their interaction, become the four-pole magnet. The four-pole magnet, at its most refined, is the electromagnetic fluid. The electromagnetic fluid, in its most rarefied form, approaches Akasha. The great work of alchemy and of Hermetic initiation is the completion of that circle in the human being, to begin in Akasha as an unconscious creature of it, and to return to Akasha as a conscious master of it. The student who meditates on this sees why Bardon requires elemental balance before Akashic work. You cannot recognize Akasha through a lens fouled by elemental excess. The fire-dominant magician sees Akasha as will. The water-dominant magician sees it as love. The air-dominant magician sees it as intelligence. The earth-dominant magician sees it as substance. All are right and all are partial. Akasha is recognized whole only from a whole instrument, a being in whom all four elements are balanced, all four poles harmonized, all four temperaments integrated into a conscious, sovereign, equilibrated awareness. That is the magician of the first tarot card. That is what Bardon is building. Every exercise in the IH is preparation for the moment the student sits in the unlimited space, breathes in the ultraviolet ether, and recognizes, not as a concept, but as a direct fact, that they have always been in Akasha. Akasha has always been in them, and the distinction between the two was never finally real.